Morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Maureen Hartnett, Hartnett.
All right, Ms. Hartnett, I know I'm going to ask you throughout this to keep your voice up, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And Ms. Hartnett, what do you do for work?
I'm a forensic scientist too with the Criminalistics Unit and Crime Scene Response Unit at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
And how long in total have you been with the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
In total, approximately 8 years.
And I'm going to ask you some questions, just a little bit about your educational background. Where did you go as far as your undergraduate was concerned?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Bridgewater State University.
And following receipt of that degree, where did you go from there?
I have a Master of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven.
And after you received your master's, where did you go after that?
I was then hired by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
And when you're initially hired, you mentioned that you're a forensic scientist too now, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So when you're initially hired, or when you were initially hired at the State Crime Lab, what was your position and what did that entail?
Are you referring to back in 2004 or in my current hire?
You're back in 2004.
In 2004, I was originally hired as a temporary employee in the CODIS unit.
And what is it that you did there?
I collected blood samples for the DNA database.
And did you receive any sort of training in regard to that work?
Yes, I was trained on how to properly collect and seal those samples.
And what did training sort of consist of in reference to that?
I demonstrated being able to take those collections and then properly store them and seal them.
Now, your current position, what is your position at the crime lab now?
Currently, I'm a forensic scientist too in the Criminalistics Unit and Crime Scene Response Units.
And what is sort of the difference between a forensic scientist 2 versus a forensic scientist 1?
A forensic scientist 1 is still in training at the crime lab.
And did you start as a forensic scientist 1 when you came into this particular unit?
Yes, I did.
And about how long a period or process is it from the time that you start as a forensic scientist 1 before you become a forensic scientist 2?
It took me approximately 9 to 10 months to be signed off to be a forensic scientist 2.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what goes on as far as that process is concerned, going from a forensic scientist 1 to a forensic scientist 2?
During that time period, we are being trained in the various types of analysis that we'll perform in the Criminalistics Unit.
And what exactly does that training sort of consist of?
The training is broken up into modules, which addresses each type of analysis. At the end of each module, we take a written exam, an oral exam, and a hand-on practical exam. Once each module is successfully completed, we'll move on to the next module.
And what are your duties as a forensic scientist in the Criminalistics Unit and the Crime Scene Response Unit?
In the Criminalistics Unit, I examine items of evidence submitted by law enforcement personnel or crime scene responders for the presence of biological fluids such as blood, semen, and saliva, as well as trace materials such as hairs and fibers. I also perform gunshot residue collection and damage analysis.
And with respect to the Crime Scene Response Unit?
For the Crime Scene Response Unit, I respond to crime scenes. I document crime scenes, analyze or test evidence, preserve the evidence, and then transport that evidence back to the crime lab.
And now, with reference to your training experience, specifically in the Crime Scene Response Unit, what is, based on your training experience, what is sort of the definition of what is a crime scene?
A crime scene is any location that may contain evidence related to a crime.
Now, with regard to those 2 positions, what, if any, training did you receive in regard to those 2 units that you're currently in while you were at the lab?
I'm sorry, are you speaking about the crime scene training specifically?
Crime scene training, yes. Let me ask you first to start with the criminalistics training.
The criminalistics training, I completed modules on body fluid identification such as blood and semen, trace analysis, identification of hairs and fibers, pattern evidence such as blood stain pattern evidence, as well as damage analysis.
And as far as the training was concerned with regard to the crime scene response?
I received training in proper documentation using sketches and diagrams of the scene. I also received training in trace collection at crime scenes as well as gunshot residue collection at crime scenes.
Now, the crime lab that you work for, is that lab accredited?
Yes, it is.
And what does that, as far as accreditation, what does that mean?
Accreditation is a voluntary quality assurance process that the laboratory is a part of, or an outside body evaluates our crime lab to ensure that our personnel, procedures, and instruments are held to certain scientific standards.
And the outside sort of vendor or the outside accrediting agency, who is that in regard to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Our laboratory is accredited by ANAB, which stands for ANSI National Accreditation Board, and ANSI is another acronym that stands for American National Standards Institute.
And as far as that accreditation is concerned, how often is that something that that your lab undergoes, or is there a certain audit process? How is accreditation sort of achieved?
We are audited, I believe, I want to say every 2 years, but I'm not 100% sure. They come out to the lab and they go through certain systems or have a certain scope in which they audit us. We also do internal audits as well.
And as far as that accreditation is concerned, is that something that was up to date in the month of January of 2022?
Yes, it was.
And is it up to date currently as well?
Yes.
Now, your work, I believe you just alluded to this as far as your testimony, but does your work go through some sort of review process?
Yes, every assignment that I complete goes through both a technical review process and an administrative review process.
Can you explain a little bit about what each of those is and what it means?
A technical review process is done by an independent analyst, either a peer or a supervisor, who will look through my file and determine whether or not they can come to the same conclusions that I came to based on my notes.
Are you familiar, based on your training and experience within the lab, of something called a proficiency test?
Yes, I am.
And can you explain to the jury what is your understanding? What is a proficiency test?
Proficiency tests are given in the different types of analysis that we do at the lab to ensure that we are maintaining our competency in that type of analysis.
And about how often are these administered, or how often do you take proficiency tests?
For biological fluid identification, I take 2 per year. For trace identification, I take 1 per year. And for crime scene response, I take 1 per year.
And these proficiency tests, are they required by the accrediting body ANAB that you were referring to?
Yes, they are.
And did you take a proficiency test in hair and fiber identification in 2022?
Yes, I did.
And what was the outcome of that proficiency test?
That was successfully completed and required a remediation.
Can you explain to the jury what remediation is and why this specific proficiency test required remediation?
A remediation occurs when you have an inconsistent answer with that is expected by the laboratory or by the test provider. In this particular instance, I had an inconsistent answer with the expected laboratory result.
And how was the remediation completed in this instance?
After the inconsistent answer was identified by my technical leader, we had a verbal discussion about why I came to the conclusion I did. To be more specific, each item had 2 samples. One of the samples for item 4, I determined as being a human hair without a root, when in fact the root was present. We had a discussion on how I came to that conclusion, and then she then mounted that hair back on the microscope, and we discussed different ways that I could have come to the correct conclusion.
And during that remediation process, were you permitted to continue to perform casework during that time?
Yes, I was. I was permitted to continue to perform casework in hair and fiber identification. However, I was temporarily asked to not perform technical reviews of my peers' work on hair and fiber identification.
And was prior casework that you had completed evaluated to verify that the previous reports were issued correctly?
Yes, they were.
And what was the determination in regard to that?
No previous casework was affected by this error.
And have you since completed additional proficiency tests in hair and fiber identification?
Yes, I did.
And what were the outcomes of those subsequent proficiency tests?
Those were successfully completed without needing any additional remediation.
as far as the remediation was concerned, if you could just explain to the jury sort of what the issue was and what that remediation process looked like again.
Sure. So I received 4 items in hair and fiber identification. Each item was told that they came from the same source. Item number 4 consisted of 2 items. One was a hair with a root. The other was also a human hair with a root, but I had said the root was absent. That was due to the fact that I didn't see anything like that under the microscope. It was something that was new to me. My technical leader reviewed that hair with me under the microscope. She showed me various characteristics such as the loss of scale pattern and the soft appearance of the root, which I thought was damage. Because we had this discussion and I agreed with the different characteristics that she showed me, she then gave me several hairs, both with damage and with roots, so that I could basically continue to understand the difference of what I was looking at. Once she looked at all my notes and agreed with everything that I had done, she then issued me an additional test to demonstrate my continued competency in this.
Now, how many criminalistics cases have you processed over your time at the lab?
Over 1,000.
And how many scenes have you processed in regard to your work with the crime scene response?
I responded to approximately 150 scenes, 80 of which I was the lead investigator on.
And how many exams have you completed with regard to motor vehicles?
Approximately 65.
Now, if I could ask just a general question as far as blood testing is concerned, how is it that you test for blood?
Normally I would test for blood by locating a visible red-brown stain or an area that may contain blood. I perform a screening test, which is not specific to blood, but other items may also come up positive for screening tests. If that screening test is positive, I go on to perform a confirmatory test.
And as far as the screening test is concerned, can you explain to the jury sort of what it is that you do in performing that screening test?
The screening test is a 2-step process. I take a cotton swab, which I apply sterile water to. I take that cotton swab and apply it to the area that I would like to test. And then I add my 2 chemicals to the swab. Depending on what type of screening test I perform, there'll be a color change, either blue or pink for blood.
And with regard to the confirmatory test, can you explain to the jury sort of what does that consist of?
If the screening test is positive, I'll go on to perform a confirmatory test, or again, a cotton swab is applied to the area of interest, or I may take a cutting depending on what the substance is. I then add a chemical to that cutting or swab, and then the liquid portion is added to a test card, something similar to a COVID, if you've taken a COVID test or a pregnancy test. The liquid is spotted at one end of the card and it flows up the strip. If there's 2 lines, it's positive. If there's 1 line, it's negative.
And through your training experience and work with the lab, are you familiar with a term called QLIM or QLIM?
Yes, I am.
And can you explain to the jury what QLIM means or how it's applied?
QLIM stands for quantity limited, which means that the sample, if it's being sent forward to DNA, would not be able to be divided in 2. Typically, we divide each sample going forward to DNA into 2, 1 to be tested in our DNA unit and 1 to be preserved for future testing. If an item is deemed QLIM, it means that that item, the entire item will be used up in the DNA processing.
Now, Ms. Hartnett, if I could turn your attention to February 2nd, 2022. Do you recall that date?
Yes, I do.
And on that date, were you dispatched to the Canton Police Department?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall approximately what time of day it was that you arrived at the Canton Police Department?
I believe it was approximately 9 a.m.
And when you arrived there, who, if anyone, beyond yourself from the state police or other sort of personnel was present at the Canton Police?
Trooper Proctor, Trooper Dunn, and Trooper Clark from Crime Scene Services Unit.
And at some point subsequent to that, were there other members of the state police that arrived in that area as well?
Yes.
And was one of them a reconstructionist named Trooper Paul?
I'm not sure what the name was. I do know that the reconstruction team did come on after I arrived.
Now, where within the Canton Police Department were you directed to go, or where did you go?
I was directed to the Canton Police Department garage.
And when you got to the garage, what specifically did you observe there, and what, if anything, were you asked to do?
I was asked to examine a black Lexus SUV.
And did you then examine that black Lexus SUV?
Yes, I did.
And you made certain observations of that, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Now, with respect to your observations that you made of the black Lexus SUV, was that memorialized in any way?
Yes, I took notes as I was examining it.
And you mentioned Trooper Clark as well, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And is he from the Crime Scene Services section within the State Police Lab?
Yes.
And what, if anything, was he doing with reference to the black Lexus while you were making your observations or while you were conducting the work?
I believe he was taking photographs. I don't know any other, I don't know what else he performed while he was there.
And your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Do you recognize that document, ma'am?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It's, it looks like diagrams that I had taken at the scene. However, it appears to be missing some information.
So as far as the notes that you took, they're not memorialized?
Could see at the podium, please. Thank you.
Ms. Hartnett, you had taken notes on those diagrams when you were at the Canton Police Station in the garage?
Yes, I did.
And that diagram that you have before you does not contain those notes, is that correct?
That's correct.
But as far as the diagrams that you had before you and that you were taking notes on, those are the diagrams or a form of those diagrams?
Yes, that's correct.
And contained on that is certain information related to the vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Includes the make, the model, license plate number, is that correct?
Yes.
And if you could just read from that form as far as what you recorded as far as the make, the model, and the license plate number.
The make is a Lexus. The model is LX570. The year was 2021. The registration is Massachusetts 3GC684. The VIN number is JTJFY7AX1M434347. The exterior color is black. The interior color is tan. The registrant is Karen Reed, and the exam location was Canton PD Garage.
I approach you, Your Honor.
Yes.
I'm also seek to introduce in the minutes of the
Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you.
Exhibit 137.
Thank you.
Ms. Hartnett, with reference to the diagram that you took notes on, do you have a copy of that with you today?
Yes, I do.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask that the witness be allowed to take that out just to, as far as the testimony related to the diagram.
Okay.
And with the court's permission as well, I would ask if we could display what's now been marked as 137 on the screen.
Yes.
And Ms. Hartnett, before you, I believe, on that desk in front of you, there should be a laser pointer.
Yes.
Just click on the button there and point it at the screen if I or anyone asks you to do so with reference to the screen. So, Ms. Hartnett, with reference to what's up on the screen, the top of that first page of the diagrams, if you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what you observed and what, if anything, you made note of in reference to your observations of the black Lexus on February 2nd.
Okay. In my notes, I had the vehicle was in overall good condition, and there was damage noted on the rear passenger side area. So that's not viewable in this particular diagram.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could scroll down to the bottom.
So in this area here.
And as far as the damage that you noted in the right rear passenger area, what was it specifically that you noted?
I noted there was a dent.
Yeah, don't read from there. What did you note?
There was a dent in the trunk door. There were scratches on the rear bumper, and there was a broken taillight.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next page, please. Now, from the diagrams that are up on the screen right now, page 2 of what's been marked as 137, if you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to each of those observations you made and where they were in relation to the document.
the damage to the dent, the rear door was in this area. The broken tail light was here, and then there were some scratches on the rear bumper as well.
Now, in addition to scratches on the rear bumper on the area of that lift gate in the back, what, if anything else, did you observe sort of within that area of the bumper?
I observed an apparent hair on the rear quarter panel about here, and I also noted some pieces of glass on the rear bumper. Oh, excuse me, I want to say apparent pieces of glass.
Now, as far as that word, when you say apparent human hair on the rear bumper, why that terminology? Why do you call it that at that stage when you're in the garage and you're making these observations?
At that time, I noted that it was an apparent hair because I had not done any microscopic observation of the hair.
And subsequent to that, did you do that microscopic examination of the hair that you observed in the rear area of that Lexus SUV?
Yes, I did.
And where was that performed?
That was performed back at the lab.
So that item was secured by yourself, taken back to the lab, and examined microscopically?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, with reference to what you termed as the apparent glass on the rear bumper, similar to the apparent hair, why is it that you use that terminology when you're making those observations of it in the garage?
I did not have any confirmation that it was glass. We refer to it as apparent glass and preserve it for the trace unit.
And when you say reserve it for the trace unit, if you could, just in general terms, describe to the jury what the trace unit is and what is it that they do as far as their analysis in relation to what you do.
Certain items will be examined in the trace unit for identification. So the criminalistics unit does not perform glass identification. That would be done in the trace unit. They also will look at other items such as plastic and hairs, but I'm not comfortable going into the analysis that they perform. I don't have the details on that.
And lastly, Ms. Gilman, if I could have the third diagram within that. And again, Ms. Hartnett, what's up on the screen is that what you have before you as the third diagram,
Yes.
or the third page of the diagram. And what, if anything, of significance did you note in this area of the diagram?
I noted the items that were located within the vehicle. There were some boxes on the back seat of the vehicle. There was also a package in the vehicle and some clothing and miscellaneous items in the trunk.
Now, as far as the items that were contained within the trunk, how high up were they? Let me ask you this. As far as the rear window of the trunk area, was there anything obstructing that?
I don't recall at this time.
Okay. Ms. Gilman, you can, excuse me, you can take that down. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you initially a set of 18 photographs. Just ask you to generally look at those, and I'm just going to ask you, generally speaking, if you recognize what is contained there. And ma'am, do you, generally speaking, do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are photographs of the black Lexus SUV that I examined at the Canton Police Department.
What's contained in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed as far as the black Lexus on that date of February 2nd?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'll excuse the minutes of that. Minutes.
No objection.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish those photographs that have now been marked for the jury?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could start with 2498. Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That is a picture of the license plate of the black Lexus SUV.
And if I could have the next photograph, Ms. Gilman, 2499. Again, do you recognize what's up on the screen, Ms. Hartnett?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That is the front end of the Lexus SUV.
And Ms. Gilman, next photograph, 2500. And again, do you recognize what's up on the screen as this exhibits 140?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize within this photo?
It's the exterior of the Lexus SUV.
And as far as this is inside of the garage of the Canton Police Station, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In addition to the vehicle, is this a fair and accurate portrayal of what the inside of the garage looked like when you were there that day on February 2nd?
Yes.
And if I could have the next photograph, that's Gillen 2501. And again, do you recognize what's up on the screen there?
Yes, I do.
And which part of the vehicle are we looking at in this photograph?
Looks like the front passenger side of the Lexus SUV.
And the next photograph is Gilman 2502. And do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph as well?
Yes.
And which side of the vehicle are we looking at this point?
The driver's side.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2505. And do you recognize what's in this photograph, Ms. Hartnett?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize this?
That's the rear driver's side of the black Lexus SUV.
And the next photograph, Ms. Gilman 2506. Do you recognize this as well?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize this?
That's the rear of the black Lexus SUV.
As far as the caution tape that's up and around the vehicle, is that something that was around the vehicle at the time that you first came into the garage?
Yes, it was.
Now, from this photograph 2506, which is exhibit 145, using the laser pointer before you, if you could draw the jury's attention to the damage that you were talking about, or where you observed that located on the vehicle.
There's damage here on the bumper, and there was also damage to the rear door. I think it may be blocked by the caution tape.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2508. So looking now at what's been marked exhibit 147, Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to zoom in a little. Now, with reference to the damage that you were talking about that may have been blocked by the caution tape in the prior exhibit, do you see that in this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And if you could, again, using the laser pointer, before you draw the jury's attention to where in this exhibit you observed that damage.
Right here. It's on the rear door, right underneath the window.
Now, Ms. Hartnett, as far as crime scene response is concerned, when you're doing this kind of examination of a motor vehicle, can you explain to the jury sort of what that process entails and what is it that you're doing over the course of your examination?
I complete an overall visual examination of the vehicle, noting any damage or anything that stands out that should be recorded. I then look for any stains or material that is on the vehicle, specifically any transfer that could have been left behind by a victim.
And as far as making those observations, what, if anything, do you then do with regard to those observations that you made from visual inspection?
I'll then perform testing on any stains that I did note or any areas of interest, and then collect anything that needs to be collected.
Now, with respect to this vehicle and this examination, what is exactly that you were requested to examine?
I was informed that this vehicle may have been involved in a hit and run, so I was requested to examine it for biological material.
And what, if any, information were you given upon arrival to the Canton Police Department in regard to that vehicle?
I was informed that the victim had scratches on his arm, as well as the fact that the car had been towed through a blizzard.
And did you perform any testing with relation to the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
And what was that testing that you performed?
I performed blood screening on the lower lying areas of the undercarriage, on each side of the tire flap, as well as the edge of the bumper and the exhaust pipe.
And what were the results of that testing that you performed there in the garage?
Those were negative.
And what, if any, evidence did you collect while you were either from the vehicle or from any other source while you were at the Canton Police Station that day?
I collected the apparent glass from the rear bumper. I collected a paint standard from the area of damage on the rear door. I also collected a paint standard from the area of damage on the rear bumper, as well as the apparent hair from the rear quarter panel. And I collected the taillight housing from the vehicle.
And turning away from that just for a moment, Ms. Gilman, if I could ask for photograph 2512. And Ms. Hartnett, direct your attention up on the screen. What's now been marked as Exhibit 150. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
And what, if anything, of significance in relation to items collected or items that you observed, do you observe in this particular photo?
I observed the apparent glass on the rear bumper.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2515. And again, up on the screen, what's now been marked as Exhibit 153. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
Now, as far as that area that you were talking about where you recovered, which you termed initially in the garage as an apparent human hair, do you see the location of that within this photograph?
Is it possible to zoom in a little bit on the area right next to the rear chair light?
Gilman, if you could.
To the best of my recollection, it was in this area.
Now, as far as areas where you observe certain items or where damage is indicated or observed by you, is that later marked in some fashion?
I note the damage in my notes.
But as far as on the physical item itself, is that marked in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, I'll use stickers to indicate areas that I would then refer to back in my notes.
So that second set of photographs that I placed before you when the stenographer was marking those exhibits, do you generally recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes.
What do you recognize those?
These are pictures of the interior of the black Lexus SUV.
May I approach her?
Yes.
You're on the phone, we'll seek to introduce in a bit. These just 4 photographs of the next exhibit.
Is there an objection, Mr. Jackson?
No objection to this. $156 to $159.
I'll take those. Thank you very much. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish those for the jury as well.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2521. Ms. Hartnett, again, direct your attention to the screen. Do you recognize what's now been marked as Exhibit 156?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the driver compartment of the black Lexus SUV.
And if I could have Ms. Gilman photograph 2527.
Your Honor, may I have just a moment with counsel?
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate it.
So Ms. Hartnett, direct your attention to the screen, photograph 2537, that's now been marked as exhibit 157. Do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do.
And what is depicted in that photograph, ma'am?
It's the front seat area of the black Lexus SUV.
And specifically, as far as the center console area of that vehicle, is that fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed inside the vehicle on February 2nd?
Yes.
And lastly, from this packet, Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2535. And Ms. Hartnett, 2535, which has now been marked as exhibit 159, do you recognize what's up on the screen there?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That's the interior of the trunk of the black Lexus SUV.
And is that fair and accurate portrayal of the interior of the trunk as you observed it in the Canton Police Department garage on February 2nd?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing another series of 9 photographs, and you just ask you to look at those. Look up when you're finished, but really what I'm going to ask you is do you recognize what's depicted in this? Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
And generally speaking, what's depicted in those 9, that set of 9 there?
These are pictures of the rear passenger area of the black Lexus.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm open to introduce and admit as the next 9 exhibits.
Is there any objection, Mr. Jackson?
None, Your Honor. Thank you.
Well, you really have to keep your voice up.
I'm sorry?
You really have to keep your voice up.
I apologize, Your Honor.
One 160 through 166 one. I'm sorry, 167. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish portions of this for the jury as well?
Okay?
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2539. Ms. Hartnett, what's up on the screen is photograph 2539. That's now been marked as exhibit 160. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That's the rear passenger area of the black Lexus.
Now, as far as the damage that you observed from the broken taillight, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to that, or what's visible of that in this photograph.
This area here is the broken tail light.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next photograph, 2540. Now exhibits 161. Again, Ms. Hartnett, if you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to where you observe, if anywhere in this photograph, damage to the right rear passenger tail.
There's damage in this area here to the rear tail light.
From the damage that you observed, it essentially wraps around from both the back and from the passenger side of the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2554. And Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen as photograph 25540-165?
Yes, I do.
And talking before, earlier in your testimony, about some stickers or some sort of evidentiary marker that you would put on an item that you're examining, correct?
Correct.
And do you see any of that in this photograph here?
Yes, I do.
And could you direct the jury's attention using a laser pointer to where you observe that and what, if any area of damage or what that's denoted?
There's a sticker here, and I know you can't see it. I don't know if you can zoom in. There's a letter on the sticker, I believe it's A, that denotes that there's something there that I was going to collect. And right next to that sticker here is the apparent hair that I noticed.
Gentlemen, if I could have photograph 2558. My apologies, 2556. And similarly, Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize anything in this photograph in regard to something that you had marked?
Yes, that's the rear bumper of the SUV.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom in a little on that placard. Okay. And Ms. Hartnett, in this photograph, what, if anything, is depicted that you noted something sort of flagged or further examined at a later?
There's pieces of apparent glass here on the bumper.
Thank you. May I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you another series of 4 photographs. If you could just look at those, look up on your pen. Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
This is the rear passenger exterior right below the taillight on the Lexus SUV.
And Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Come up, please introduce me. There's an excellent exhibit. Okay.
It's 169 to 173.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish some of these photographs to the jury?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2573. Ms. Hartnett, again, photograph 2573, what's now marked as exhibit 169. You recognize what's depicted in this?
Yes, I do.
And if you could explain to the jury sort of what we're looking at in this photograph?
This is the area of the rear passenger side of the vehicle just below the taillight.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask sort of towards the top center of that photograph, if you could zoom in on that area. Ms. Hartnett, do you observe another sort of sticker or placard that you place in that area?
Yes, I do.
And what, if anything, is that in reference to?
I'm sorry, I can't see what the letter is on it, so I'm not sure what that's in reference to.
If I could ask Ms. Gilman.
So, Mr. Lally, when you put your head down to read, your voice goes down considerably. We can't get a recording of your voice, so you need to speak up.
Understood. Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2576. And Ms. Gilman, if you could, with reference to the 2 areas up on that, if you could zoom into that area. I'm sorry, first on the one below. Ms. Hartnett, can you see better there as far as what the sticker is and what you had noted there?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what you had noted in that particular area?
I noted there were scratches in that area.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, the one above. Thank you. Also within this Exhibit 172, there's another sticker further upward on the vehicle. What, if anything, did you note or observe in that particular area?
In that area, I noted the apparent hair.
Thank you. May I approach the witness stand, Your Honor?
Yes.
There's another series of photographs of this asking the same question. If you could take a look at those and asking if you recognize generally what they are.
Next question, Mr. Lally.
Yes. I'm sorry, Your Honor. May I approach?
Yes.
I'll call on to introduce and admit this next. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd ask to publish some of those photographs to the jury as well.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2558. Again, Ms. Hartnett, you recognize what's contained in photograph 2558, Exhibit 173.
Yes, I do.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to just zoom in a bit on the sticker in the middle of the screen. And again, Ms. Hartnett, what is depicted in this photograph?
That is a picture of the apparent hair I noted in the area.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2561. And for the record, this is Exhibit 176. Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to zoom in a bit on the sticker in the middle there. It's hard to recognize what's depicted in this exhibit.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the damage I noted on the rear door.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the
Yes.
witness? I'm showing you a series of 3 photographs. That's those that we finished. And do you recognize those, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are photos that I took of the taillight housing back at the lab.
And what's contained in that, those 3 photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of the taillight housing once you had removed it and taken it back to the lab?
Yes.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I want to seek to introduce the minutes and exhibits.
No objection.
Thank you.
Now, as far as the collection of that evidence that you collected from the vehicle specifically, how was that evidence collected? And again, you've received training in regard to collecting evidence, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the collection of evidence that you did in this case, was that in conformity with that training and experience that you have?
Yes, it was.
And so how did you collect those pieces of evidence from the vehicle on that particular day?
It depends on what the item was, the taillight specifically, is that what you're asking about?
Well, first let me ask as far as the hair, and then I'll move on to some other items if that's all right. So as far as the hair was concerned, how was that collected?
I would have collected the hair with tweezers, put it in a glassine envelope, and then put that into a larger manila envelope.
And as far as those steps that you take, as far as the collection is concerned, what are some of the concerns for that, or why is it that you take those steps?
Prior to touching any evidence, I would put on gloves. I'm not sure in this case whether I used disposable tweezers or reusable tweezers. If I used reusable tweezers, they would have been bleached prior to my using them to prevent contamination.
And so each of those sort of steps that you take in your collection process, is that fair to say that it's in an effort to combat contamination?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, with regard to the paint chips or the paint standards from the vehicle, how did you collect those?
Those would have been collected with a disposable scalpel. I use it to scrape off pieces of paint from the vehicle, which are then put in a glassine envelope and a larger manila envelope.
And as far as the pieces of glass from the bumper area of the vehicle, how were those collected?
I collected those with gloves. I may have used tweezers. I don't recall at the time. But again, if I used tweezers, I would have used bleach tweezers or disposable tweezers.
Now, as far as that taillight assembly was concerned, how was that collected, or what, if any, issues did you have with regard to collecting?
I removed the taillight. Once I had the taillight housing in my possession, I did have trouble disconnecting it from the vehicle. So a police officer on scene did help me disconnect it from the vehicle so that I could properly package it.
And as far as what exactly was it that officer helped you do, or what, if anything, did he do?
I believe he just removed, helped undo the wires that were in the back of the taillight so that I could properly hold it and didn't have to place it down anywhere.
So you had two hands on the taillight as he was performing that, is that correct?
Yes, I believe I did.
And as far as the area of the taillight that you were holding, you were wearing gloves, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as far as that area that you were holding with your two gloved hands, did that officer touch any area of that part of the taillight?
Not to my recollection, no.
And do you recall whether or not that officer was wearing gloves himself when he disconnected that wiring?
I don't recall.
Now, as far as once you removed that taillight from there, what, if anything, did you do with the taillight there?
I put it into a brown paper bag and then transported it back to the lab, where I then properly secured it in a box with added cushion from additional paper to ensure that no additional damage was done.
Now, with respect to your time at the Canton Police Station, were you presented with any additional evidence by any officers from the Canton Police?
Yes, I was.
And what were those items?
I was presented with a broken drinking glass that was reported to have been recovered from the scene at 34 Fairview Road. I was also presented with several solo cups filled with frozen red-brown stains.
Now, starting with the drinking glass, what, if anything, did you do with regard to the drinking glass?
I packaged it in a brown paper bag.
And with regard to the cups with red-brown stains contained within, what, if anything, did you do with regard to that?
I allowed the cups to thaw, and then I took 2 sterile swabs, like something similar to a Q-tip, and collected a sample from the red-brown stains in those cups.
And then what, if anything, after you took the swabbings from those solo cups, let me ask first with regard to the solo cups, what were done with those?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. So after you took the swabbings from the red cups, what, if anything, was done with the red cups?
I returned those to the Canton Police Department to store as they saw fit.
And as far as the swabbings that you took, what did you do with those?
I secured those in a glassine envelope in a larger envelope, and then transported those back to the lab.
Now, after your examination on scene, you returned back to the lab, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what items of evidence did you examine first in this case in the laboratory?
I examined the apparent hair from the vehicle as well as the broken taillight.
Now, starting with the examination of the taillight, well, let me ask, in general terms, when items are taken by you back from any kind of scene or any kind of place that you're processing, and you bring them back to the lab, what is it that you do with them when you get back to the lab?
When I get back to the lab, I ensure that they're packaged properly, that they're sealed, and they're stored in the appropriate location within the lab. I also enter them into our laboratory information management system so that from that point forward, those items can be tracked throughout the lab.
Now, each of those, now when you come in with sort of a case, is there some sort of number or something that's associated with the case when you first sort of generate that?
Yes.
And do you recall the case number that you assigned or was assigned with regard to this investigation?
Yes, I do.
And what is that case number?
The case number at the lab was 22-2184.
Now, with regard to each specific item of evidence that's taken back to the lab and logged in, what, if any, numbers are assigned or associated with those particular pieces of evidence?
Each piece of evidence is given an independent lab item number.
Now, with respect to the taillight, that was labeled as 3-1, is that correct?
That's correct.
So with respect to item 3-1 or the taillight, can you explain to the jury the examination process that went into that?
Sure. I prepped my workspace by spraying it down with a 10% bleach solution. I also sprayed down any reusable utensils that I would need to use. I then applied a piece of butcher paper to protect the lab bench and prevent contamination. I would put on gloves, my lab coat, and mask before I examine any item of evidence. And then I took photographs of what the packaging looked like and then photograph of the piece of evidence itself.
And then from that specific item, did you perform any testing on that item?
No, I did not do any testing on the item.
And why not?
I was, due to the case history, there was no visible red-brown stains on the item, as well as the fact there was a very limited surface area for me to sample from. In addition, I was informed that the car had been towed through a blizzard. So given the fact that there was potentially very limited material on the taillight, if any type of testing that we do would remove additional material. So I made the conservative decision to take a swabbing of the item and send it forward for DNA.
And as far as that swabbing of the item for DNA purposes, can you explain sort of what the process is or how that's done?
Yes, we use a polyester swab, which is a flat spatula-shaped swab. I apply sterile water to the swab and rub the exposed areas of the taillight. And then that swab dries before it's packaged and sent to DNA.
Now, with the court's permission, could I publish for the jury what's now been marked as Exhibits 187 through 189?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have first photograph 8970. Now, Ms. Hartnett, directing your attention to what's up on the screen now is Exhibit 187. Again, do you recognize what's depicted in there?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
That is the taillight that I removed from the black Lexus SUV.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 8971, next photograph. What's now on the screen is Exhibit 188. Again, do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
And what is depicted there, and what, if anything, is, in addition to the taillight, what, if anything, are you?
That is the taillight from the black Lexus SUV from a different angle. I am holding up a ruler to show the scale of the item.
And lastly, photograph 8972 to 189. And again, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at, perspective-wise, and what, if anything, you're doing in this photo?
That is the back side of the taillight, and again, I'm holding up a ruler to show the scale of the item.
Thank you. Ms. Gilman, you can take that time. Sorry, just one moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, Ms. Hartnett, from your initial response to the Canton Police Department, you secured a number of different items from the Canton Police Station that day, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And those were labeled subsequently as items 3-1 through 3-13, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, turning your attention to item 3-6, that was the apparent hair, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in reference to your analysis with regard to the hair, that QLIM term that I asked you about before, QLIM, what, if any, significance did that terminology have to your examination of the hair?
Per protocol, all hairs that will go forward for DNA are considered QLIM, meaning that the entire sample will be used up during testing.
And with regard to item 3-6, the apparent hair, can you explain the examination process or what it is that you're doing with reference to that?
Yes. I take the apparent hair and I mount it on a glass slide using deionized water. I then put the slide under a microscope and I'm looking for certain characteristics to determine if that piece of material is a hair or fiber or some other unknown material.
And as far as your examination is concerned in that microscopic analysis, what are some of the things or what are some of the characteristics that you're trained to look for that you observed in this specific instance to give you that determination that it was a human hair?
On the exterior of the hair, there'll be scales, and depending on the shape, it can help you determine whether or not the hair is an animal hair or a human hair. Human hair have imbricate scales, which look like overlapping shingles with a wave-like edge. That is what I observed on this hair. In addition, the internal characteristics of the item were looked at. Running through the center of a hair is a medulla, which is a channel. Animal medullas and human medullas look different in that human medullas will have sort of an amorphous shape, which means they don't really have any shape at all, whereas an animal medulla will have distinctive or can have distinctive patterns within them. Also, the size of that medulla or channel that runs through the center of a hair in a human hair is approximately 1/3 the entire width of the hair, where in animals it may be much larger than that.
Now, as far as based on your examination of this particular item, this hair, what, if any, opinion or what, if any, determination did you come to in regard to that item that you examined microscopically here?
I determined the hair was consistent with the human hair with a root.
Now, as far as that item was concerned, was there any measurements that were done in reference to that?
Yes, there were.
And do you recall what the measurements were or what the length was?
I'd have to refer to my notes if that's possible.
May the witness refer to her notes just in reference to that?
The hair was approximately 7/8 inches long.
Now, with regard to item 3-6, the hair, did you perform any testing on that?
No, I did not perform any testing.
And why not?
The only type of analysis done on hairs in the criminalistics unit is a visual microscopic examination.
So where did the hair go from there?
At that point, I cut the hair into two pieces, one end that contains the root and then the remaining end of the shaft. The root end went to our internal DNA unit.
Now, it may be pretty well understood, but when you say root end versus shaft end, can you explain to the jury what you mean by those sort of descriptions?
The root end is the end that would have been attached to the scalp, and the shaft end is just the remaining outer portion of the hair.
And how is it that you're able to determine sort of the difference between the root end and the shaft end?
Through the microscopic characteristics under the, that I viewed.
Now, with reference to that item 3-6, the hair, were any decisions made in regard to what testing could or would be performed on those samples?
Yes, based on the criminalistics protocol, the root end of the hair would be tested internally in our DNA unit, and if potential testing needed to be done on the shaft end, that would be sent out to an external lab.
And do you know why that is?
We don't perform that type of DNA testing at our lab.
And that's something, you're familiar with the term mitochondrial DNA testing?
I am familiar with it, but I don't really have a full understanding of it.
But as far as your understanding is the type of testing that would have had to been sort of sent out to an external vendor, that would be, the type was mitochondrial?
Yes, that was my knowledge at the time, yes.
Now, at some point, did you have a conversation with regard to examination of the remaining items in this case sometime in May of 23?
Yes.
And what was discussed?
It was discussed that I would examine the clothing and some of the other items for biological testing.
And specifically, there was an item 7-18, which was a gray sweatshirt attributed to Mr. John O'Keefe, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, from that, as far as sort of an additional analysis or an examination of those clothing items, what is it that you were doing and what is it that you were looking for in regard to your examination of the clothing items?
I examined the item for biologicals. In this case, I was looking to determine if there was any blood present on the item. I also did damage analysis of various areas on the sleeve and the front and back of the item. I also took a trace collection from the item and additional DNA samples for that, additional skin cell collection samples from the item.
Now, starting first with, as far as that specific item, 7-18, the gray sweatshirt, what, if any, observations in general did you make when you examined it?
There were red, brown, and brown stains on the item. There was damage from the top of the shirt to the bottom of the shirt, as well as across each sleeve of the shirt. I also noted additional damage on the right sleeve.
Now, each of the areas of damage that you observed, similar to what we saw with the vehicle, were those areas marked as well?
Yes, I marked each of those areas that I was going to do further analysis on with a number.
And there were essentially 13 different areas on that sweatshirt that you had marked, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sergeant, just showing you a series of 6 photographs, and again, asking you to look at those and look up when you finish. And do you recognize those photographs?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are the photographs I took of item 7-18, the long sleeve gray shirt.
And those are sort of the preliminary or overall photographs, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm on the seat to introduce and admit as the next exhibits. No objection.
Thank you.
Ms. Hartnett, before I turn to these, I just had one follow-up question. And you had been talking about, or testifying about, sort of the difference between the root end and the shaft end of the hair. You had mentioned that the root end is typically something that would be attached to the scalp. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that would be in reference to a hair that comes from someone's head, correct?
Yeah, but not necessarily. We don't perform body origin identification.
And so to that point, as far as the root end of the hair that was attached to the body at some point, whether it's the head, an arm, a leg, you don't know where?
Correct, I do not.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish some of these photographs for the jury as well.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have, excuse me, photograph 9789. Ms. Hartnett, putting up on the screen now what's been marked as Exhibit 190. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That is the photograph I took of item 7-18. It is the exterior front.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9790, the next photograph. What's up on the screen is Exhibit 191. You recognize that as well, Ms. Hartnett?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That is the exterior rear of item 7-18.
And if I could have the next photograph, Ms. Gilman, 9791. Again, do you recognize what's up on the screen now is Exhibit 192?
Yes, I do.
Can you explain to the jury what that is?
That is the interior front of item 7-18.
And lastly, not lastly, for this purpose, photograph 9792. And again, do you recognize what's up on the screen is Exhibit 193?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the interior back of item 7-18.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9795. Again, Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 194?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That is the exterior front of item 7-18, and it also contains markers that I placed on the item to note areas of damage.
And the next photograph would be Ms. Gilman 9796. If you could zoom in on that one. Now, Ms. Hartnett, what we're looking at here, that's the right sleeve of the gray sweatshirt, item 7-18, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so, starting with some of the 13 different areas that you labeled, this starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, and goes up through 9, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, ma'am. I approach the witness again, Your Honor.
Yes.
Hartnett, showing you another series of photographs. Just ask if you could review those, look up when you finish. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish some of those photographs for the jury as well.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9811. With respect to what's up on the screen, Ms. Hartnett, you recognize what's now been marked as Exhibit 196.
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That is an area of damage that I noted as area 1 in my notes.
Is Ms. Gilman, if I could have, photograph 9812, the next one. Again, Ms. Hartnett, you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 197.
Yes, I do.
And with respect to this, what are you doing here?
That is a close-up photo of the same area of damage, area 1.
That has some measurement that you're taking with reference to the size of that damage, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you do that respectively with each of the respective areas that you noted on each of the garments that you examined?
Yes, I did.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9813. Again, this is area 2, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9815. Again, what's up on the screen is Exhibit 200. Recognize this as what now?
That's a photograph of the area 3 that I noted.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9817. Now, with respect to what's now been marked as Exhibit 202, do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do.
And is that the number 4 area that you noted on the right arm sleeve of the gray sweatshirt of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, that's correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9819. What's up on the screen is Exhibit 204. Do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do.
And again, what is depicted in Exhibit 204?
That's the area of damage number 5 that I had in my notes.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
The photographs that I placed before you while the stenographer was marking the prior exhibits, do you recognize what's depicted in those?
Yes, I do.
And can you describe for the prior exhibits, the photographs that I placed before you while the stenographer was marking the prior exhibits, do you recognize what's depicted in those?
Yes, I do.
And can you describe for the jury, sort of generally speaking, what's depicted in those, ma'am?
These are close-up photos of areas 6 through 11 that I noted on the long sleeve gray shirt.
And may I approach this retrieve, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, call will seek to introduce as the next exhibits. No objection. And if I may approach the witness just to present another set.
Okay.
Exhibits 206 through 217.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Hartnett, what's contained in these photographs now been marked as exhibits 206 through 217. Those essentially sort of the same close-ups and then a close-up with a measurement that the jury just saw in regard to what you had marked as 1 through 5.
Yes, that's correct.
And this is just 6 through 11 on that same area in the right sleeve of Mr. O'Keefe's sweatshirt.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, with regard to the photos that I just placed before you a moment before, do you recognize what's depicted in those?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are the areas of damage 12 and 13 on the rear of the sweatshirt.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish these photographs for the jury?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9837. And Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 218?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the exterior back of the gray sweatshirt.
And the items marked that you labeled as 12 and 13, are they depicted on that?
Yes, they are.
If you could, using a laser pointer, just draw the jury's attention to where 12 and 13 are.
Is it possible to zoom in on the numbers? I can't read them from here. So there's area 2 and area 12 and area 13.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9838. Exhibit 219 up on the screen, is that just a closer image of those areas you marked as 12 and 13? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, with respect to the other photographs that I had placed before you when the stenographer was marking those, do you recognize in general terms what's depicted in those?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are additional pictures of the sweatshirt in which I've also made some notations of areas that need further testing.
May I approach Ron?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Hartnett, before I get to what's now been marked in Exhibit 222 through 230, if I could just ask you a couple questions in regard to damage that you noted on this item or really any item. What is the process that you would go through as far as classifying damage to a clothing item?
I look at the macroscopic characteristics of the area of damage, and then I also examine the area of damage underneath the microscope.
And so what would lead you to make that sort of classification as far as something is damaged?
I look at the overall shape. I also look at the fiber ends. For instance, a tear will have rough fiber ends and possibly separation of the weave of the fabric, or a cut, you have even ends without any fraying.
Now, are you able to tell from your examination of those fibers and of those clothing materials sort of what caused those tears and cuts?
No.
Now, are you familiar through your training experience with something called an ALS or an alternate light source?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what your understanding of that term is and what, if any, use it had to you in this case?
An alternate light source is a light that uses a different wavelength that enables visualization of some biological fluids that can't be seen necessarily with the naked eye. On this particular shirt, I did use the alternate light source.
And what, if anything, did you observe when you used that?
I used that light source around those areas of damage to determine if there was any biological fluids that were fluorescing. The ALS did not show any stains in that area.
Now, with regard to what you had labeled as sort of tears or cuts 1 through 9 that you noted, did you do any additional testing or collecting specifically from those areas?
I collected 2 cotton swabs moistened with sterile water around those areas of damage.
And why did you do that?
It was told to me that potentially the victim may have been bitten by a dog during an incident. So I was taking swabs of that area to be sent out to determine if there's any dog DNA on that area.
Now, is that kind of testing, as far as canine testing or animal testing, is that something that your lab at the State Police Crime Lab is accredited or authorized to do?
No, we do not do that type of testing.
And is that sort of sent out to an external vendor then?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that something that you had done on any prior cases or any previous situations where you had collected items and sent it out to a specific lab for animal testing?
I did consult once with an external lab on taking those types of collections, but this is the first time I've collected and actually sent something out for that type of testing.
And specifically in this type of testing and in this case, what lab were those items sent out to?
We use the UC Davis Veterinary Lab in California.
And as far as prior to collecting or prepping or doing anything as far as collecting samples from that, who, if anyone, did you talk to, or what, if any, direction did you receive in regard to collecting those samples?
I'll allow it.
I emailed Terry Kuhn, who is one of the analysts at the clinic, who aided me in how best to collect the sample for their lab.
And what you were directed to do as far as collection, packaging, and shipping, was that at the direction of UC Davis Lab?
Yes, that's correct.
And you performed those functions in conformity with what Ms. Kuhn told you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, with regard to those items, did you note, with regard to the clothing items, as far as the gray sweatshirt was concerned, did you note any stains on those areas? On that clothing item?
Yes, I did note stains in those areas.
And then what, if any, testing was done on those stains that you observed?
Can you be more specific what stains you're referring to?
So what I'm specifically referring to is the items on the gray sweatshirt, item 7-18, as far as any stains that you observed on there. Again, sort of moving on from what you had collected for the UC Davis lab, but in other areas of that item. Well, let me actually first turning back to that. So the item that we were talking about as far as where you collected stains from that were sent off to the UC Davis lab, which item were they collected from and where on that item were they collected?
I collected 2 swabs from the areas around the damaged areas on the right sleeve. I wasn't necessarily taking them from any stains. I did use the ALS to determine if there were any stains there, which I did not visualize. So I was doing that for potential saliva collection from that area.
And thank you for the clarity. I think that was me confusing as far as the questions go. So turning away from that area as far as the collection for the UC Davis lab, in addition to that, what, if any, stains did you observe on that article of clothing, 718, the gray sweatshirt?
I also observed numerous red-brown stains on that item of clothing.
And so with regard to those red-brown stains, what, if any, testing was done on those stains?
On each of those stains, I performed a blood screening test as well as a blood confirmatory test.
And are those the same sort of initial testing screening test you were talking about before, and then the confirmatory test?
Yes, that's correct. A different screening test was used in the lab than was used at the scene due to a protocol change, but essentially it's the same mechanism.
And was that with respect just to the gray sweatshirt, or were there other items of clothing of Mr. O'Keefe's that you tested with the screening test in the lab and a confirmatory test in the lab as well?
I examined other items of clothing as well.
Now, if I could bring your attention back to what's now been marked as Exhibits 222 through 230. Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish some of those photographs for the jury.
Okay.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could first have photograph 9841. And what's been marked as Exhibit 222. Again, you recognize what's depicted up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And with reference to your observations of the red-brown stains on that clothing or any other item of clothing, similar to the tears or cuts or the damage areas that you observed, Were those areas similarly marked with some sort of sticker?
Yes, that's correct.
And is it sort of the same linear path as far as numbering, or is it lettering, or how do you denote those?
For the red brown stains on this item, I use letters.
Starting with A and then sort of going through it, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have, excuse me, photograph 9842. Again, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That would be red brown stain A that I noted on the sweatshirt.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9843. And what's up on the screen, which has been marked as Exhibit 224, do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
Those are red brown stains B and C that I noted on the sweatshirt.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9844. What's up on the screen now is Exhibit 225. Those are stains that you labeled B, C, and F, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's just sort of a holdout version of that to denote where B and C were located on the sweatshirt. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9846. And what's now up on the screen is Exhibit 227. And again, Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom in a little bit on those stickers. And Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up there on the screen as Exhibit 227?
Yes, I do.
And these are two other stains that you noted as far as D and E on the same item.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, ma'am, with reference to the other photographs that I think you still have before you that I gave you when the stenographer was marking the last batch, do you recognize generally what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are photographs of item 7-17, the orange T-shirt that was told was belonging to John O'Keefe.
And what's depicted in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed as far as the orange T-shirt was concerned in your lab that day?
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes. All right, Mr. Lally.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hartnett.
Good afternoon.
So with respect to the photographs that were just marked as exhibits of the orange T-shirt, that was item that was marked as 7-1, is that correct? I'm sorry, 7-17.
Yes, that's correct.
So similar to how you had marked off areas of either damage or red-brown stains, was that similar to what you did with the gray hooded sweatshirt? Is that similar to what you did with the orange T-shirt as well?
Yes, that's correct.
And then there were two other clothing items that you examined, being a pair of jeans and a set of sneakers, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with reference to the jeans, that was marked as item 7-1, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with respect to the sneakers, that was marked as item 7-4, is that correct?
Each sneaker had its own item number. One was 7-3 and one was 7-4.
And with respect to the evidence as far as the stickers and sort of the denotations that you had made in regard to either damage or red-brown stains, was that similarly done with respect to each of those remaining clothing items as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So, Ms. Hartnett, with respect to the jeans, showing you a series of 8 photographs, do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
Those are photographs that I took of the pair of jeans.
And what's contained in those photographs, a fair and accurate portrayal of your observations of those jeans when you conducted your examination of them at the lab?
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Almost the seats introduced and admitted as the next exhibits.
All right, and there's no objection, you said, Mr. Jackson, correct?
Thank you.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have, excuse me, photograph 9862. Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen that's now been marked as Exhibit 231?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's a photograph I took of item 7-17, the orange T-shirt, and it's the exterior front.
And Ms. Gilman, 9863. And again, Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 232?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the exterior back of item 7-17.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9867. And Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom in on sort of the upper right portion of that where the stickers are. Now, Ms. Hardy, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 233?
Yes, I do.
And again, using the laser pointer, if you could draw the jury's attention to any items that you, or any areas of this shirt that you marked on.
I marked 3 specific red-brown stains using these stickers and letters A, B, and C.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to keep the zoom in, but go to the bottom left of the photograph. And similarly, Ms. Hartnett, within this zoomed-in portion of Exhibit 233, if you're using a laser pointer to draw the jury's attention, what, if anything, you noted there?
I noted red-brown stain D, which I marked with the sticker, and D on the bottom right.
Last name, Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 9873. And Ms. Hartnett, what's up on the screen is now marked as Exhibit 239. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom in on the upper left portion of the photograph. And again, Ms. Hartnett, if you could, using the laser pointer, just draw the jury's attention to what, if anything, you noted there.
I noted this specific red-brown stain, and I marked it E.
Okay. And Your Honor, similarly, with the court's permission, if I could publish what's been marked now as Exhibit 242 through 249.
Okay.
Ms. Hartnett, direct your attention of the screen with now been marked as Exhibit 242. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's a photograph of the exterior front of the jeans with the belt, item 7-1.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9887. And as you testified before, similarly to the other clothing items that you testified about, did you mark off certain items of interest or areas of interest on this item as well with respect to the jeans?
Yes, I did.
And that's depicted in this photograph.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 9888. And if you could just zoom in, Ms. Gilman. And again, Ms. Hartnett, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to those areas that you noted or that you marked off in respect to this.
I marked off red-brown stains A, B, C, D, and E on the front of those jeans.
Thank you. May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Hartnett, showing you another series of flying photographs. You those. Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are photographs of the sneakers, items 7-3 and 7-4.
May I approach her?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth seeks to introduce them into the next exhibits.
Okay.
No objection.
Thank you.
Ms. Hartnett, with reference to the sneakers and sort of the other clothing items that you received, do you recall how or where or when it was that you received each of those respective clothing items? Or how the lab did, you know?
They were received by the lab from the Norfolk Detective Unit.
And as far as the sneakers being labeled with two different stickers, do you know why that was?
One of the sneakers was recovered from 34 Fairview Road, and one of the sneakers was recovered from the hospital.
Now, with reference to the photographs that I've just placed before you, have you had a chance to look at those?
These ones here?
Yes,
No.
if you could. And do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
Those are the fingernail clippings that were submitted for John O'Keefe
And do you know where they were submitted from?
by the Norfolk County Detective Unit.
May I approach you?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Hartnett, with respect to those stains on the gray sweatshirt, the orange t-shirt, and the jeans, what, if any, testing was done with respect to those stains?
A screening test was performed on each of the Rembrandt stains on those items. I'm sorry, did you say the sneakers? Could you repeat what items you're speaking of?
With respect to each of those respective clothing items, what, if any, testing was done with regard to any stains you observed on those items?
For the sweatshirt, the t-shirt, and the jeans, I saw visible red-brown stains, which I screened for blood. The majority were also, I also performed a confirmatory test for blood. There was one stain on the orange t-shirt, however, that was too small to perform that confirmatory test. So for that instance, I noted that the stain was quantity limited, and I preserved it after the positive screening test instead of performing a confirmatory test in order to preserve enough material for any DNA analysis. As far as the sneakers, given their dark color, I did not see any visible red-brown stains on the black area of the sneakers, so I used an alternate light source to aid in visualizing any potential blood on those sneakers. With that alternate light source, I tested several stains on the sneakers, one of which screened positive for blood.
Now, with respect to the other clothing items that you were talking about doing the screening test and the confirmatory test for blood, with respect to the gray sweatshirt, the orange t-shirt, and the jeans, what were the results of that screening test and that confirmatory test that you ran with regard to each of those things?
The screening test and the confirmatory test were positive.
Now, beyond the stains, did you take any additional samples from those items?
Yes, I did.
And what were those and how was that done?
For each of the items, I picked up any loose trace material, which would be hairs and fibers or apparent hairs and fibers that were adhering to the item. I also did a scraping and swabbing for a skin cell collection of the unstained areas, and that involves taking a sterile scalpel and swabbing the areas of the clothing that don't have any visible stains on them, and then taking 2 cotton swabs and swabbing that same area, and then combining those scrapings and swabs for potential DNA analysis. In addition to those, I also took a scraping of each of the materials, and that involves taking the item, using something like a flat metal spatula, and scraping down whatever adhering materials left on the item into a glassine packet.
And as far as those items, once they're collected from the material or from the clothing, what do you do with them from there?
Each of those items is given its own item number. It's a sub-item of the overall larger number used to mark the item, and those are sent to the appropriate units for additional testing.
And as far as preservation is concerned, when it comes to sending something to either the trace unit or the DNA unit, what, if any, steps are taken in regard to preserving those items once they're removed from the clothing and sent off to the other units?
Each of those items would be preserved according to protocol. They are sealed properly, initial and dated with my initials and date. They're entered into our LIMS system, so those sub-items could then be tracked throughout the laboratory, and they're stored in the appropriate storage unit.
Now, at some point, did you also receive items that were labeled as 3-2 and 3-3?
I submitted those when I returned from the original scene.
And what were those, ma'am?
Those were pieces of glass from the bumper and a drinking glass from the crime scene.
Now, did you examine those items?
Yes, I did.
And what, if any, examination did you do, and what is it that you were looking for in your examination?
I did a visual examination, and I took photographs, and then I also took a collection from each of the items.
And did you do any testing on those items?
No, I did not.
And what kind of samples did you collect from those items?
I took potential skin cell collection using a swab moistened with sterile water.
And as far as the samples that you took from, as well as the items themselves, what, if anything, did you do with reference to those once you were done with your examination?
The swabs were preserved for testing in the DNA unit, and the original items, the apparent pieces of glass and the drinking glass, were preserved for the trace unit.
As far as those preservations were concerned, is that similar to the preservation process you were describing earlier with regard to the clothing items?
Yes, that's correct.
So both Mr. Lally and Ms. Hartnett, you have to keep your voices up, or we have to turn the air conditioning off.
Understood, Your Honor. I may have one moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I don't have any further questions, Your
All
Honor.
right, cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Hartnett, you responded to Canton Police Department. A lot of your testimony was about what happened in the Sallyport, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You were asked if you responded to the Canton Police Department on February 2nd, and most of your testimony was predicated on that date, you going over there and doing some visual observations, as well as some removal of items and some other testing, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Was it February 2nd or was it February 1st?
May I check my notes?
I'd appreciate it if you did, yes.
My apologies, that was my error. It was February 1st.
Okay. So everything that you testified to, you only went once.
Yes, that's correct.
So everything that you testified to having taken place on February 1st, we should assume it was actually on February 2nd, we should assume it was actually February 1st, the one time you were there.
Yes, I was there one time.
Okay. Were you dispatched to the Sallyport? And I apologize, I'm not yelling at you. I'm trying to keep my voice elevated, so just so you know.
Understood.
It's not my normal speaking voice. You were dispatched at the behest of one of the Massachusetts State Troopers, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The Detective Bureau specifically, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Trooper Proctor more specifically, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Trooper Proctor, you knew at that time to be the lead detective, the person that was in control of the investigation.
May I check my notes who I wrote down as the lead investigator at that
If it
time?
would refresh your recollection, sure. With the court's permission.
Yes.
Yes, I was told on scene that Trooper Proctor was in charge of the investigation.
All right. Now, while you were there, one of the things that you did initially was to just do an overview of the vehicle, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Obviously, that was important given the limited information that you had at that time about a potential motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
Correct.
So you were looking for anything that would rise to a level of investigative concern regarding that vehicle, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Hence your review and notation of certain scratches on the vehicle. Is that right?
Yes.
Which may or may not have anything to do with the incident, but you noted it anyway, correct?
I did not draw any conclusions as to where those scratches came from.
Okay, you just took the words right out of my mouth. My next question, the dent that you noted and photographed, you made no conclusion that that occurred as a result of a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
The scratches, and I'm just going to go through a couple of them, the scratches that you denoted and had photographed, you made no conclusions about that having anything to do with a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
Even the broken taillight At that point, you made no conclusions or drew no scientific conclusions about that having anything at all to do with a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
You did, however, look for tissue, human tissue, blood, biological material, and things of that nature on the car itself. Did you not?
Yes, I did.
In that review, I think you testified that you saw nothing that suggested the transfer of human tissue to the vehicle, correct?
I did not see any visible stains or tissue on the vehicle.
You were told, Ms. Hartnett, that there were scratches on one of the extremities of John O'Keefe, correct?
That's correct.
Were you shown a photograph of those scratches to assist you in your visual review or examination of that vehicle?
Not at that time, no.
To this date, have you seen a photograph of his arm and the injuries to his arm?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, if I may, if we have it, could I display for the jurors and for Ms. Hartnett Exhibit 19?
Is this the one that's
The arm
covered a bit?
has been
Okay.
propped,
Yes.
Your Honor. Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's depicted in Exhibit 19?
Yes, I do.
And you've seen that pattern of scratches previously, correct?
Yes, I've seen a photo containing
Okay,
something
and that's
similar.
consistent with the photo that you've seen since your visit to the Sallyport on February 1st, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Was there anything in your, by the way, did you look at all around the vehicle 360 degrees?
Yes, I did.
Did you look toward the top of the vehicle as well as toward the bottom of the vehicle?
I did not examine the roof of the vehicle. I did not examine the roof of the vehicle.
Understood. Did you examine the undercarriage of the vehicle?
I did look at the undercarriage of the vehicle.
And you know what I mean when I say undercarriage.
Yes.
Could you explain for the jurors what you mean when you use the word undercarriage?
The parts that normally you would have to see by, bending over or laying underneath the car to view what's underneath the vehicle.
That would include the frame and the axle and the drive shaft, transmission, things of that nature.
Yes, I'm not confident in all the terminology of the undercarriage, but yes.
Did you see anything that was suggestive of or consistent with the pattern of injury that you see to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm?
I wouldn't say I'm qualified to make any kind of pattern determination and what would match the injuries on his arm.
So the answer to my question is, as you sit here, you made no observation of anything on the SUV that matched these injuries, correct?
I wouldn't be, sorry.
Go ahead and answer that.
I wouldn't be able to testify from that from memory. I don't have a photograph of the undercarriage, nor did I make any kind of conclusions about that at the time.
Okay, understood. And you didn't take the swabs and samples that you did take variously on the car all came back negative for human tissue, et cetera.
The testing that I did on scene from the various areas of the undercarriage, which I had mentioned before, the tire flaps, the edge of the bumper, and the exhaust pipe, screened negative for blood.
Okay, Mr. Jackson, can we take this down?
I'm just going to suggest that. Thank you, Your Honor. On February 1st, 2002, in addition to taking some swabs from the vehicle itself, you also mentioned that you took swabs of what you believe to be blood evidence contained in 6 solo cups, correct?
Yes, I noted those as frozen red-brown stains in red cups.
Were those solo cups in any way labeled among themselves? In other words, solo cup 1, 2, 3, 4.
I don't believe they were, but I don't have a photograph of that, so I'm not 100% sure.
You did not thereafter label those solo cups. If they hadn't been done beforehand, you did not undertake that to label those solo cups, correct?
No, I did not label them.
Did you, how did you take those swabs? Was the swab done in one solo cup, or did you take a swab from all 6, or how did you take those swabs that you ultimately did take?
I took those swabs from one solo cup.
How did you choose which of the 6 solo cups you were going to take a swab from?
I don't recall exactly how I chose which cup. It was reported to me that those cups came from the same area of red brown staining, so you make an assumption that they're all related. It came from what I was told, it came from one area of red brown stain at the scene.
And you, of course, know as a forensic criminalist that blood stains can contain multiple contributors, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You don't know as you sit here which blood stain found at the scene related to which solo cup in the bag, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
No, it was my understanding they were all taken from the same stain, but I was not there.
From the same scene or?
Stain, excuse me. It was my understanding they were all taken from the same stain.
Okay. If they in fact were taken from multiple stains, you would have no way of knowing that as you sit here.
That's correct.
And ultimately, once you did take that swab from that single solo cup, what did you do with the rest of that blood evidence?
I left that with the Canton Police Department.
Was there any of the swab? By the way, I should ask this. I've been saying swabs. Was there one swab taken of that one solo from that one solo cup, or were there multiple swabs taken?
There were 2 swabs taken.
Of those 2 swabs, did you seek to do DNA testing, or was DNA testing done on either one of those or both of them?
DNA testing was not done on those swabs.
So as we sit here now, there's been no DNA confirmation of what who that blood relates to, I should say.
There was no testing done on it at all.
And so therefore, we would not know if there were multiple contributors to those stains or that swab that you took from that single solo cup.
That's correct.
Okay. And again, the remainder of all of that solo cup, as well as all the other 5 solo cups, was retained by Canton Police at the Canton Police Department in the control of the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, correct?
I don't know who was in control of it once I returned it to the Canton Police Department.
Who did you return it to at the Canton Police Department? Whom, I should say.
I believe I gave it to a Canton police officer. I don't know which officer that was.
Michael Proctor was at the Sally Port at the time that you were doing your examination, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did he not take control of it himself?
Not that I saw. I don't know who took control of them once I was done with my collection.
They have, you just don't know.
Correct.
Okay. Going back to some of the damage that you did note on the vehicle, that vehicle looked like it had been driven to a certain degree, right?
Objection.
Can you answer that?
I'm not. If you could clarify the question, I'm not sure what you're asking.
Terrible question. Let me try it again. That vehicle was not a vehicle that had clearly just come off the showroom floor and had not been in use, based on your examination.
I don't think I am qualified to make that kind of decision.
It looked like there was some normal wear and tear on the car.
Other than the specific items that I pointed out earlier, the dent and the scratches, the exterior was in overall good condition. So I can't say specifically if it was driven I don't think I can make that conclusion unless you want to rephrase the question.
You didn't have any reason to believe that car was in any other condition than it had been owned and driven by somebody, right? Or could you make that conclusion?
I don't think I can make that conclusion.
So it could have been an absolutely brand new, right off the showroom floor car?
I guess I don't have any understanding of what could have happened to it in the showroom. I'm not sure I understand the line of questioning.
Why don't we move along?
Fair enough. I guess what I'm asking is, you've done some damage analysis in the past, obviously. This was not your first rodeo, right?
I don't do damage analysis of some vehicles.
Okay. Did this car look like it had reasonably normal wear and tear on it? That's my question.
I don't feel comfortable answering that question.
Okay. Ultimately, the right rear taillight housing was removed, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Were you the person, Ms. Hartnett, who actually used the tools to remove that taillight, be it screwdrivers, wrenches, anything else?
No.
Who was that actually did that work?
It was a Canton police officer that had entered the garage, and as I was removing it, he offered to help. He said he knew how to basically take it out of the housing, which at that point, I was not sure how I would do that.
Okay. I'd like to show you an exhibit that you'd been shown just a few minutes ago before the lunch break, 187, with the court's permission.
Okay.
Does that look like the same housing that you removed from the SUV, or you saw being removed from the SUV?
Yes, that is the taillight housing that I submitted to the lab from the garage.
Ultimately, there was a swab taken, you mentioned on direct examination, of that taillight somewhere on the house, correct?
Yes, I took a swab from that taillight.
Where exactly did you take that swab from?
I took it from the outer exposed areas, which would have been on the outer side of the vehicle. So I did not take it from the internal, what would have been the internal portion of the taillight when it was intact.
Can you point with a laser pointer exactly where you swabbed that taillight housing?
Sure. Is there a way that, can it get zoomed in just a little bit so I can differentiate the silver in the front? I'm having a little trouble.
Is that zoomed in enough, or do you need more?
I believe so. I can start. So I took it from the red area here that would have been exposed. And then if we could zoom in a little bit more just on this front area so I can differentiate between the internal structures and the external.
Was it one swab?
Yes, that's correct.
So you swabbed multiple areas with one swab and then submitted that.
Yes.
So you don't know, as you sit here, where, if any DNA was detected, where that DNA may have come from,
No, that's correct.
other than the general housing altogether.
Yes. So then just to finish your previous question, I did.
Sorry, I didn't mean to-
That's okay. It's just I couldn't see it. So this area here, which would have been the external portion of the taillight. So the areas I did not swab were any areas that would have, when the taillight was intact, been protected by the outer plastic housing of the taillight.
Is your testimony, Ms. Hartnett, that what you just pointed to was the exterior portion of the taillight, bottom left?
No, just this piece of plastic here is the exterior, the exterior piece of plastic.
And you swabbed that area as well as other areas on the exterior, like the red upper right.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. As you swab that, the DNA test does not differentiate where you swab, just that you swab, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That was all one swab, one collection.
Got it. So we can't define whether the DNA was to the upper right, on the outside of the lens, or some other place that you pointed to.
That's correct.
And of course, you're familiar with touch DNA, et cetera, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Touch an item, walk away, sweaty palms. Good likelihood I just left some DNA on this podium, correct?
Yes, you can transfer skin cells by touching an item.
Thank you. We can take that down with the court's permission.
Sure.
You also indicated that you collected glass from the rear bumper of Miss Reed's Lexus, correct?
Yes, I have it as a parent glass, but yes.
As a parent glass, fair enough. You labeled that as item 3-3, and it was 5 pieces of glass labeled A through E, right? A, B, C, D, E. Is that
May I refer to my notes?
with the court's permission?
Yes.
I'm just unfamiliar with the lettering A through E. I don't believe I have that in my notes. If you could refer to
Is
the
it-
document that you have.
Is it possible that, and this is just ignorance on my part, is it possible that once you submitted that for further testing, somebody else may have labeled those individual pieces A through E? You did not?
That's possible. I did not label them A through E.
Okay, got it. Understood. Thank you for that clarification. As a matter of fact, you labeled it as quantity 1, correct? On an evidence submission form?
In the LIMS system, that's correct. Each item is, that quantity value is only used for specific things. So when I submit something as one item, it doesn't matter how many pieces it actually is. It's just, I'm submitting it as one item.
So in other words, one group.
That's correct.
But it's so we're clear, and I want to make sure that these numbers are crystal clear. In that group, under 3-3, there were 5 pieces of apparent glass that you recovered, correct?
I don't have the exact number in my notes, and honestly, it's difficult to tell from my picture, so I don't want to say that I saw 5 pieces of glass.
Did you not annotate that somewhere, that you recovered 5 pieces?
Again, I have a photograph of it, but it's difficult to see on this printed page, so I didn't specifically write 5 pieces anywhere.
Okay. Well, okay, then let me see if I can do it this way. Instead of pitching, let's catch. The person that you submitted it to would have annotated exactly what the grouping was that you submitted to try to be accurate.
I'm the one that initially, after the item was sent to fingerprinting, then I examined the item, but I didn't write down exactly how many pieces of glass were present. I just took a photo.
And as you sit here, you don't recall necessarily how many pieces you took off that bumper.
Correct. And the quality of the photo does not allow me to see that at this point.
Okay, let's take a look at that photo. With the court's permission, this is Exhibit 168. Can we show that, display that? And if we could, Mr. Bates, with the court's permission, can we zoom in on the area? And a little bit bigger than that. Capture all of the placards there. Zooming in at this point, and I would ask you, Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize this photo? It's zoomed a little bit. Do you still recognize it?
Yes, I do.
Is that a photograph that you caused to be taken at the Sally Port on February 1st, 2022?
I believe it was February 2nd, right? Did we, or it's February 1st now? We agreed it's February 1st. My apologies. Yes, on February 1st, I did request that photo be taken of the apparent pieces of glass.
Okay. And can you, I know you can't see necessarily every piece. Can you use your laser pointer and point to a piece?
Sure.
Okay. Got it. So that's the largest of the pieces, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's correct that none of these pieces of apparent glass were embedded in the bumper. They weren't dug in, stuck into that hard plastic, correct?
No, I do not have that. I do not have that notation that they were embedded, just they were on the bumper.
As a matter of fact, they were physically perched on top of that hard plastic horizontal bumper, correct?
To my recollection, they were just sitting on the bumper, yes.
Okay. And do you know, just in your experience, and if we could leave this up for just a moment while I ask the next couple of questions, Your Honor.
Okay.
Do you know where Dighton, Massachusetts is?
I know the general area.
How far would you say that is from Canton?
I don't know, maybe a half an hour. I'm not exactly sure.
Do your notes indicate that the vehicle was recovered from Dighton and towed back to Canton and placed in the Sally Port before you started your examination?
Yes.
So and you also had been apprised before you began your examination that the incident in question took place in Canton, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you knew as you were looking at this vehicle and doing your examination, the vehicle had to have been driven by definition from Canton to Dighton and then towed back from Dighton back to Canton, correct?
I was informed that the car was recovered in Dighton.
And ultimately either driven back or towed back. One of the ways, some way it ended up back in Canton, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if Dighton is, how far would you say Dighton is from Canton?
Again, I'm really guessing. I would say maybe a half an hour.
30 miles?
Potentially. I don't know exactly. I was never in Dighton.
Okay, so according to your notes, the glass pieces that we're looking at on the back of this bumper would have traveled, let's call it for round figures, about 60 miles in a blizzard before you saw it.
I don't know when the glass pieces were ended up on the bumper, so I couldn't say.
And of course, you knew that on February 1st, you knew a few days earlier, on the 29th, there had been a pretty significant snowstorm here in Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, I did have that information.
And that blizzard included high winds, freezing rain, snow, all the good stuff with a blizzard, correct?
I don't recall the exact weather conditions of the blizzard.
But irrespective, after all of that, whatever that was, you saw these 5 pieces just sitting perched on the top of the bumper, not embedded in any way, correct?
That's correct.
And you recovered those with little bitty tweezers, correct?
Yes.
We can take this down with the court's permission. You testified on direct examination that you also found a hair on that rear panel, the quarter panel of the car, correct?
Yes, at the time of the scene, I noted it was an apparent hair, correct.
And the apparent hair, and I'll try to use that same word, I keep forgetting, you'll correct me. That apparent hair was not sitting on the horizontal bumper, but on a vertical portion of the quarter panel, correct?
That's correct.
Did you find the hair, or was that hair pointed out to you by somebody else?
I believe I located the hair.
How exactly was that hair secured to that vertical panel, if you can explain that?
It didn't appear to be secured in any way. It was just on that quarter panel.
Okay, so it wasn't taped,
No,
it wasn't glued,
no,
wasn't stapled.
no.
It was not affixed in any way whatsoever. It was just perched on that vertical panel of the SUV, correct?
That's correct.
And for you to remove it, and by the way, you found this at the same time that you found the general time, that you found the glass pieces as well.
That's correct.
So that hair potentially would have had to make that same 60-mile round trip in the same blizzard.
At the time, I don't know when that hair was deposited on the vehicle.
Right. And it didn't take you much to remove that hair, correct?
I picked it up with a pair of tweezers.
It didn't give you any resistance?
Not that I recall.
Okay. I'd like to take a look at that hair if we can. I know you've seen it just a few minutes ago. I want to look at it one more time. With the court's permission, these are exhibits 165 and 173. If we could start with 165 and publish those.
Okay.
Does that look like a close-up view of, actually, is that a zoom? Yeah. Can we pull back out? Your Honor, may I do this a different way?
All right.
This is actually, with the court's permission, okay, I'll get to that in just a second. I want to try to. Your Honor, may I approach briefly?
Yes.
Thank you. 163, 75. These are zooms the last month. If I may hand you those very briefly, could you take a look at those 4 photographs and tell me if you recognize the first 2 to be exhibits 165 and 173. They're not marked on there, but what you earlier looked at.
Okay.
Do those appear to be those 2 exhibits that you earlier saw?
Yes, I don't know what numbers they were, but I do remember seeing these photos earlier.
Fair enough. And then the second 2 photos, do those appear to be zoomed photos of the same 2 photographs?
Yes, they do.
With the court's permission, I would ask that the zoomed photos be marked as next in order.
Is there any objections to Ally?
No, Your Honor.
May I approach?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. May I inquire, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we're looking at what's previously been marked as 165. Does that appear to be a photo of the hair?
Would it be possible just to zoom in on that,
Absolutely.
the
This is not
sticker?
an eye contest.
And just a little bit, I'm just trying to read the letter on the white marker. Yes, so that, correct.
So that hair looks, as we're looking at it, you will agree, that hair looks like almost like a backward C, correct? In other words, it looks like it's more vertical than flat in that photograph, correct?
I would agree it looks like a C on the side of the car.
If we could go to Exhibit 173. And this is the same hair photographed a second time, correct?
If we could, again, just zoom in on that sticker. Yes, that's correct.
Ms. Hartnett, does it look to you like between the first and the second photographs, that hair has moved? It's no longer an inverted C, but a C.
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I see the two ends, which may still be making contact with the vehicle. I can't make that determination based on this photo.
Fair enough. So that was sort of my next question. I'll just dovetail it this way. Did it appear to you that the hair, which is curled, was making contact with the vehicle on the top point and the bottom point?
I would say from this photo, I honestly can't tell if those two ends are coming off the vehicle or touching the vehicle. I just can't make that determination.
But you would agree that that hair was somewhat precariously perched on that vertical quarter panel, correct?
Objection.
I want to sustain the objection, ask it differently.
Mr. Bates, we're finished with that. With the court's permission, we can take that down. If you take a look at the zoomed photos that have just been marked as 259 and 260 respectively, can you take a look at those side by side, and when you're finished, I'd like to ask you a question or two about those.
Okay.
Does it look from your perspective, seeing those photos side by side, that the hair appears to have gently moved just a little bit between the two photos?
I just don't think I can make that determination. They're taken from different angles. I just don't know. I can see that they have a curl in both, but I don't know which ends are making contact or if the ends are coming off the vehicle.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hartnett. There's one more exhibit I'd like to take a quick look at and ask you a couple of questions about. With the court's permission, Exhibit 195, which is a shirt.
Okay.
Do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes, I do.
And you saw this just a few minutes ago on direct examination as well, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You indicated that you took 2 swabs from the, quote, area around damage, numbers 1 through 9 of the gray sweatshirt, end quote, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, can you describe for the jurors how you took those swabs, and were they of all 9 or a select number of the 9? How did you do that?
I moistened 2 cotton swabs with sterile water, and then I took those 2 swabs. May I use the pointer to just show?
Of course.
And I vigorously swabbed around. I don't know if it's working. There we go. This entire area. So every area of damage, I swabbed around all of it using the same 2 swabs. So it was one collection from all those areas.
One collection on swab 1 and one collection on swab 2. You just repeated the process.
No, I took them exactly at the same time. So I held the 2 swabs together.
Oh.
And as I'm swabbing, I'm rotating the swabs to make sure that all the exterior of the swab is coming into contact with that material in order to collect equal samples, or at least attempt to collect equal samples on each swab.
Okay, we can take that. Thank you. And you indicated that this was the first time that you had done swabbing specifically for the purpose of trying to find either canine DNA or animal DNA.
That's correct.
Had you been trained at the time that you took the swabs, had you been trained or received any training or any teaching about the relationship between keratinized tissue, and DNA.
No,
Do you know what keratinized tissue is?
no.
Did you photograph exactly where any of those swabs were taken, or just notate it in your notes?
I notated in my notes that overall photo is the photo that I used to describe the sample that I collected.
And I think it probably goes without saying, you didn't videotape your swabbing technique on that shirt either, correct?
That's correct.
You did include a handwritten note on your report that you found, quote, debris from T-shirt 717 and shirt 718, correct?
I performed a debris collection on each of those items. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
That is what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a note in your report that you had recovered some debris or you've done some debris collection, correct?
That's correct.
And you indicated in your note that the debris was from shirt 717 and shirt 718. Is that right?
May I refer to my notes?
And with the court's permission.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And shirt 717 is which shirt?
The orange t-shirt.
And shirt 718 is which shirt?
The long sleeve gray shirt.
All right. So you took, is the right word scrapings?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You took scrapings from both shirts. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And then combined those together and submitted that as the quote unquote debris that was assigned a new item number 7-18.18, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So as you sit here, you don't know where the debris came from specifically other than the two shirts. Could be one, could be the other, could have been a combination of both.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you describe in detail anywhere the actual debris that you found? Little fibers, little hairs, little pieces of green or blue or whatever?
If I was able to pick out a hair or a fiber, I would have attempted to do that from the debris collection. The debris collection was just anything that was left on the item that I was not able to pick off.
Okay. And you did not note any debris item that was plastic or plasticine, anything like that, correct?
No, I did not make any kind of observations on the debris itself.
And there was no marker put on any part of the debris that was recovered, correct?
That's correct.
And there was no photograph taken of the debris,
That's correct.
and there was no videotape of the debris collected?
Correct.
Okay. When you received item 717 and item 718, that came in one evidence bag, did it not?
Yes, it did.
Your Honor, may I approach briefly?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind taking a look at that. That's a photograph. I'd ask you to review and tell me if you recognize it. Not the photograph, but what's depicted in the photograph.
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize that?
This is the container that contained it's a photo of the brown paper bag that contained the long sleeve gray shirt as well as the orange t-shirt.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
If I could ask that be marked as minute in order.
Any objections to Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Is it 261?
May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. This evidence bag notes, let me start over. This evidence bag is in the condition that it was in when you received it, meaning the writing on the back was already there when you received it.
Yes, that's correct.
And it notes that these items of evidence were collected by Trooper Proctor, correct?
Yes, correct.
And the date of collection was January 29, 2022, is that right?
I'd have to relook at that
Of course.
for the date.
May I approach?
Yes.
Yes, I didn't,
Display,
So you got an answer.
my
Right, I think-
apologies.
my mistake.
The date on there is January 29th, 2022.
So I don't have to walk back and forth, may I, display
Yes.
pictures before we finish? Okay, does that look like what you're looking at, exhibit 261?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Let's see if I can stand out of the way. You see Trooper Proctor's name on the evidence bag as the person that collected it.
Yes, that's correct.
And it also has a description of what's in the bag, and it shows both the orange t-shirt and the gray sweatshirt collected together and bagged together, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the date, again, once again, on the upper right, is January 29, 2022, correct?
Yes, that's,
Okay. You have no way of knowing, as you sit here, the journey that those two items of evidence took before they got to you in your lab, correct?
yes, they're tracked as soon as they're entered into our laboratory system by us.
I didn't hear any of that. I'm so
My apologies. The item would be tracked as soon as it's submitted to our lab by us, by the crime lab.
Thank you. We can take this down, Your Honor. Thank you. The debris that you ultimately got from the shirt or shirts, you don't know if that debris may have been in the bag and the shirts picked up the debris in the bag or otherwise, correct?
Correct.
Because they were housed together,
Yes,
stored together.
that's correct.
Were you aware before you began your analysis on either one of those shirts that those shirts had been found at the bottom of an ambulance, on the floor of an ambulance at one point?
I don't have any knowledge of where the clothing, what condition the clothing in was before I got it.
Okay, and that probably answers my next question, but just for the record, you don't have any knowledge personally as you sit here that either one of the shirts or both of them were floor of a hospital room as well.
I have no information about where the shirts were.
One of the things that you did indicate was, in your direct examination, was how important it is to maintain sanitary conditions with evidence to avoid contamination, correct?
That's correct.
For instance, you wouldn't want to take the swabs that you so carefully utilized to swab an item of evidence and then, oops, drop it on the floor. You would have to discard that item and then start over, correct?
If a swab is dropped on the floor, we don't discard it. We would preserve it, but that would be a note that we would have to put in our file, and that, yes, that swab would not be tested any further.
Right, because of the possibility of cross-contamination.
Correct.
And at least according to the evidence bag, those two shirts were in the custody and control of which trooper before you got them?
Trooper Proctor collected the evidence according to the bag.
Thank you. Ultimately, Ms. Hartnett, every single piece of taillight material and clothing that you've described in your testimony today on direct and cross-examination, all of that evidence was presented to you or to the lab at one time in one bundle on March 14th, 2022, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
Which portion was in the lab before March 14th?
The tail light that I collected from the vehicle was submitted prior to that, as well as any other items that I took from the vehicle.
Okay, that was a great answer and my mistake. I knew that and I forgot it. So the taillight housing you took on the first?
Correct.
Okay. Every other item other than the taillight housing itself, which you took personal possession of, all the taillight fragments, all the clothing, orange shirt, gray shirt, jeans, shoes, everything was all submitted in one fell swoop on March 14th, 2022. Is that right?
No.
What else am I incorrect about?
So I just wanted to clear, anything that was collected from the vehicle, as well as the swabs from the red Solo cups and the drinking glass that I was presented with at Canton PD, was submitted by me on February 1st. The other items, the clothing items, were submitted together. And then there was another submission that had the fingernails and the known blood standards. So there were several submissions. So I I'm hesitant to lump it all into one because it did happen on different dates.
Okay, fair enough. Can we agree that the earliest submission, with the exception of the stuff that you actually took with you from the Sally Port, the taillight material, whatever swabs you took, I'm sorry, the taillight housing and whatever swabs you took, all of the other material that was submitted to the lab, all of the other evidence, the earliest date anything was submitted was March 14, 2022.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to take another look at my submission forms just to clarify.
May I approach?
Yes.
I think I have it. It's a
Okay.
two-page document, if I can show Mr. Lowry. Is that a copy of your submission form?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If you could familiarize yourself with that for just a quick second.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. May I approach one more time now? Tracking along. I have one more document I'm going to ask you to take a glance at.
Okay.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
What is that document, the second document that I just handed?
This is a printed chain of custody report from our laboratory information management system.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to mark the first document's name again. I want to get it right.
It's the evidence submission form for submission 7.
Evidence submission form for submission 7, two-page document, if I could have that next in order. And then the,
Chain of custody. My apologies.
Is there an objection, Mr. Lally?
Yes to both.
So the objection sustained unless you want to convince me otherwise.
I'll have the mark for ID
Okay.
for the time being. That's fine. If that's okay with the court.
Yes.
If you could take a look at what's been marked as VV, that's the log. I just want to go through this relatively quickly. With regard to plastic pieces that were submitted, if you look on page, for instance, page 11, where a tab is,
Yep.
that shows that that piece was submitted on March 14th, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And there was a piece submitted on March 14th on page, notated on page 12.
What item are you referring to?
It's a plastic piece.
Yes, correct.
Page 13, another plastic piece.
Yes, submitted on March 14th.
And page 14, another plastic piece.
Yes, that's correct.
Page 15, another plastic piece.
Correct.
And page 17.
Oops. Sorry. Yes, that's correct.
And then if you turn to the next page, page 18, that's the orange t-shirt. It shows its submission date, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what's that date?
March 14th.
And then on page, the bottom, very bottom of page 20, going into page 21, there's another item, the gray t-shirt or gray sweatshirt.
Yes, that was also submitted on March 14th.
Okay, thank you. I may approach?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we need those. They're marked for identification.
I'm not sure if I'm going to use it one more time.
Put them up on the bench and you can grab them.
Of course, may I?
Yes.
Ms. Hartnett, before you received all of the items that we've talked about and all the items that you've testified about, with the exception of the items that you physically took with you from the Sally Port, everything else that you've testified to was submitted to you on March 14th or after, correct?
That's correct.
And all submitted by Trooper Proctor, correct?
I know they were all submitted by the Norfolk County Detective Unit. I don't know the specific officer that necessarily dropped them off at the lab.
Can you answer the question based on the log information that you have and the chain of custody that's in front of you? Can you answer the question whether Trooper Proctor or anybody else stored the taillight lens material and the clothing in the same place or in the same bag before you received it?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that question one more time?
Based on the log information that you have, in other words, the chain of custody that's in front of you, that you can absolutely look at and determine where things were and who had them, can you tell us whether or not Trooper Proctor or anybody else stored any of the taillight material and the clothing in the same place or even in the same bag?
No, I don't have any information to how the evidence was treated before it was received in the lab.
In fact, that's because there is no chain of custody for that data. I'm sorry, for those items. There's no data for those items predating March 14th, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
You don't personally have any chain of custody information about those items we just went over predating March 14th, do you?
I personally do not have any data that would indicate where those items of evidence were prior to them being accepted into the lab.
And one of the reasons why you have such detailed chain of custody protocols is to maintain control over where items go and how they're handled and by whom, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further to this.
Okay, anything, Mr. Lally?
Just a couple. Now, the vehicle that you observed, the defendant's vehicle in the Sally Port of the Camp Police Station, that was in generally overall good condition, other than the areas of damage that you noted on the right rear, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you were swabbing, the swabs that you took from the taillight housing that you then later submitted to DNA, that was a taillight housing that you took from the Camden Police Station, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You logged that into the lab?
Yes, I did.
You took those swabbings and then you packaged them and you sent them to the DNA, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And all of those swabbings were taken from the exterior area of that taillight assembly, is that correct?
Objection.
The objection sustained is to the form.
With regard to those swabbings that you took from the taillight housing, where on the taillight housing did you take them?
I took them from what would have been the exposed area of the taillight, should the taillight have been intact. So I did not collect from any of the interior portions of the taillight that would have been protected by the exterior plastic piece.
Now, at the time that you were looking at the vehicle in the Sally Port of the Camden Police Station, do you recall what the temperature was inside the garage?
No, I don't have that information.
Was the temperature the same inside the garage as it was outside of the garage? If you know, was it heated at all?
I don't know if it was heated.
As far as the vehicle itself was concerned, when you saw it in the garage, did you see any sort of frozen snow or ice or anything like that on the exterior of the vehicle?
Not to my recollection, no.
I have nothing further on.
On that limited bit,
One follow-up question. May I approach?
yes.
If you take one more look at that, what's been marked for identification is you. That's the evidence submission form, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Who signed that form?
Objection.
So the objection sustained unless you want to see me at sidebar.
I'll ask it a different way. whose name is on the bottom of the form.
Objection.
It's the same question. Do you want to come up? Do you want to come up to sidebar?
Yes, Your Honor.
May I have that, please, Ms. Hartnett?
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, I have no further questions. Your Honor.
Right. All right, Ms. Hartnett, you are all set. Thank you.